A black father walked into the Rowan Freight recruitment center wearing safety boots with worn-down heels. An asthma inhaler sat inside his coat pocket. His 8-year-old daughter waited outside in the hallway. His name was Darius Bell. He completed the technical assessment faster than every other applicant there that morning. The supervisor looked at the score on the screen once. Then he leaned forward and looked again, as though he could not believe that a man whose job applications had been rejected so many times could produce a nearly perfect result. 98 out of 100. Darius did not celebrate. He simply removed his safety gloves, wiped a thin layer of machine oil from his fingertips, and discreetly glanced through the glass door leading into the hallway. His daughter, Nia, sat on a metal chair against the wall. Her feet did not reach the floor. A workbook, with a frayed spine, rested on her lap. Every few minutes, Nia looked up at her father. Whenever their eyes met, she smiled. Darius answered with a small nod. He had promised her that today would be different. He had told her that if everything went well, they would no longer have to choose between paying the electric bill and buying asthma medication at the end of the month. He had told her that the job came with health insurance, a stable schedule, a paycheck large enough to begin paying the bills he had folded into small squares and hidden inside a kitchen drawer. More importantly, the work matched his trade. Darius was not asking anyone to feel sorry for him. He was asking for one chance to do what his hands had been doing for almost 20 years. But only seconds after his test result was confirmed, the screen beside his name suddenly turned red. Applicant ineligible. It was not because Darius lacked experience. It was not because he had violated a safety procedure. And it was not because the manager had discovered a lie on his application. The score remained on the screen. 98 out of 100, but the green mark beside Darius Bell's name had disappeared. In its place was a cold, final red line. It looked like a door closing without anyone bothering to explain why. The supervisor avoided Darius's eyes. In a low voice, he said that the background check system had detected a problem. Darius asked what the problem was. The supervisor said he was not authorized to provide the details. Darius asked whether he could appeal. The man behind the desk shook his head. The system had flagged the report. The decision had been generated automatically. The recruitment center had no authority to change it. Darius stood motionless in front of the screen. He did not become angry. He did not slam his hand against the desk. He did not raise his voice and remind everyone that he had passed every test the company had given him. He simply stared at the red words longer than necessary, as though he had already seen them in too many places during the past several months. They had appeared in an email from a food processing plant. They had been printed at the bottom of a letter from an elevator repair company. They had been read to him over the phone by a human resources manager who could not remember his name. 63 job applications. 63 times, Darius had written down his name, address, experience, and years in the trade. 63 times, he had hoped his ability would be seen before his past. And 63 times, some system had decided that the past mattered more than the man standing in front of it. Darius slowly accepted the applicant card being handed back to him. Then he turned and walked into the hallway. Nia immediately closed the book on her lap and ran toward her father. She looked at his face. Then she looked at the security officer, approaching from the far end of the hallway. Darius did not need to say anything. Children may not understand payroll, criminal records, or hiring algorithms. But they always recognize the moment hope leaves a parent's face. The applicant card slipped from Darius's hand and fell to the floor. Nia bent down and picked it up. A red mark had just been printed in the upper corner. The little girl stared at it for a long time. Then she looked up and spoke so softly that the entire hallway seemed to fall silent. "Dad, do they know you were in prison?" Darius did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened. He looked at his daughter and searched for words gentle enough to keep an 8-year-old child from carrying a shame that had never belonged to her. On the observation level above them, Celeste Rowan heard the entire question. She was the woman who owned this building. She owned the system that had just rejected Darius. And she owned a freight empire whose name appeared on thousands of vehicles traveling across the United States. Celeste had not planned to be there that morning. Her flight to Denver had been delayed by bad weather. Instead of returning to corporate headquarters, she had instructed her driver to stop at the nearest recruitment center so she could inspect the operation. There was no reception committee, no cameras, no senior managers lined up at the entrance. Celeste entered through a side door, wearing a simple gray coat. In one hand, she carried a tablet that still displayed the company's quarterly earnings report. She intended to stay for 10 minutes. Then she saw Darius, standing in front of the electrical panel. She watched him test a breaker with the back of his hand before touching the wiring. She watched him lower his head and listen to the motor instead of immediately dismantling its components. She watched his rough fingers handle small connectors with the patience of a man who understood that machinery had a language of its own. The supervisor beside Celeste quietly said that the applicant was very good. Celeste only nodded. In her opinion, being good was not enough. A skilled person still had to satisfy the process. But when Celeste heard Nia's question, something small shifted inside her chest. She no longer saw an applicant who had failed to meet company standards. She saw a father trying to keep his daughter's question from becoming a wound she would carry for the rest of her life. Celeste turned to the supervisor and ordered him to open the background report. The man hesitated. He explained that the data was controlled by the compliance department. Celeste looked at him. She did not need to raise her voice. Inside this company, no one made the founder ask twice. The report appeared on the screen. Darius Bell's name was at the top. Below it was an arrest from years earlier, a serious charge, a case number, a conclusion stating that Darius had been convicted, and an automated warning that prohibited him from holding any position involving access to vehicles, equipment, or warehouses. Celeste scrolled to the bottom of the page. In the lower corner was the approval symbol for Risk Protocol 4.2, the system she herself had signed off on 3 years earlier. Celeste's hand stopped moving, not because she recognized Darius's name. She had never met him before that morning. Her hand stopped because a small line in the court record showed that the charge had been dismissed. Darius Bell had never been convicted. He had not been rejected because of a criminal sentence. He had been rejected because Celeste's system could not distinguish between a person who had once been arrested and a person who had actually been found guilty. Celeste raised her head and looked through the glass. Darius was leading his daughter out of the building. Nia held her father's hand with both of hers, as though she feared that if she loosened her grip, the world might take him away again. The door closed behind them. On the screen, Darius Bell's name was still red. Celeste Rowan was 49 years old. Her name appeared on more than 4,000 tractor-trailers, 112 distribution centers, and millions of packages transported every year. She was the founder and chief executive officer of Rowan Freight and Logistics. Celeste's net worth was estimated at $8.3 billion. The number was so large that people no longer imagined it as money. It became buildings, fleets of trucks, air freight routes, warehouses glowing through the night, and tens of thousands of people beginning their shifts before sunrise. Celeste could sit in her Chicago office and know that a refrigerated truck was running 17 minutes late outside Phoenix. She could look at a screen and discover that a conveyor belt in Ohio was operating 3% below capacity. She knew the fuel consumption of every route, the damaged goods rate at every distribution center, the average number of seconds an employee needed to scan a package, turn, and place it on a conveyor. But until that morning, she had not known the name of the man her system had just pushed out the door. Celeste had built Rowan Freight from 8 aging leased trucks after a bankruptcy. 30 years later, her company had become one of the largest privately owned freight networks in the country. Business magazines called her the woman who could turn chaos into a schedule. Investors liked to say that Celeste did not see obstacles. She saw only the cost of removing them. She did not object to the description. In Celeste's world, emotion was a form of interference. Process was the only thing cold enough to be fair. Every morning, she woke at 4:45 in a penthouse on the highest floor of a tower beside the Chicago River. The home had 5 bedrooms, only one had ever been used. There was a private gym filled with equipment imported from Switzerland, but her trainer had quit 2 years earlier because Celeste constantly cancelled their sessions. There was a wine cellar containing more than 300 bottles, though she rarely drank. On the roof was a winter garden kept warm throughout the year by specialized glass. Small olive trees stood in rows beside the stone walkway. Jasmine bloomed even in January. A round table sat in the middle of the garden with 4 chairs around it. The housekeeper only needed to clean one. Celeste rarely went there. The garden had been built because the architect said that a busy person needed a place to breathe. But whenever Celeste stood among the smell of damp soil and green leaves, the silence of her home seemed even deeper. Silence inside an expensive apartment was not the same as peace. It had an echo. Her breakfast was always placed on the kitchen island at 5:15. A cup of black coffee, a slice of whole grain toast, a bowl of fruit that was usually untouched when she left. Her driver waited in the underground garage. Her assistant sent the day's schedule before the car began moving. Her meetings were packed so tightly that even a 10-minute opening was highlighted in yellow. Celeste preferred it that way. When every minute had an assignment, the past could not find an opening through which to enter. At Rowan Freight headquarters, she worked inside a glass office overlooking the river. There were no family photographs on her desk, no children's drawings on the walls. Only a metal model of the company's first truck, a clock that made no ticking sound, and an enormous electronic map displaying thousands of moving lights. Every light was a vehicle. Every vehicle represented a freight route. Every route represented a promise to a customer. Celeste believed the world functioned because of promises that could be measured. She disliked phrases such as, "Please consider the circumstances." In her experience, circumstances were simply another name for exceptions. Exceptions caused delays. Delays caused losses. And losses eventually fell upon the people least able to carry them. That was how she explained every policy someone described as too rigid. Celeste did not believe she was heartless. She believed she was realistic. And the most dangerous thing about a false belief is not that it sounds cruel, it is that it often sounds perfectly reasonable. 3 years earlier, Celeste had approved a new recruitment system. It examined every applicant's employment history, education, licenses, driving record, and criminal justice data. The engineers called it Risk Protocol 4.2. Celeste called it a protective barrier. She had been told that the algorithm would remove personal bias from hiring. There would be no more prejudiced managers, no more interviewers making emotional decisions. Only data, only standards, only green for those who qualified and red for those who did not. During the first year, recruitment costs fell by 19%. Early employee turnover also declined. The board applauded when the numbers appeared on the screen. Celeste signed the order, expanding the system throughout the company without carefully reading the section on appeals. That section appeared near the end of the report. 12 lines of small print, 2 charts, and a warning that third-party data could sometimes fail to distinguish an arrest from a conviction. Celeste had turned the page. The meeting was already running 7 minutes late. She could no longer remember where her signature had been placed, but the system remembered. Machines always remember the things people allow themselves to forget. For 30 years, Celeste had believed that a good company was one capable of functioning without depending upon anyone's kindness. That morning, she still did not fully understand where that belief had gone wrong. She only knew that Darius Bell had earned the highest score, that he had been removed from the building without an explanation, that a child had just been forced to ask whether her father was a bad person, and that Celeste's own signature stood at the end of the process that had rejected him. Celeste returned to the report. She enlarged the court information section. A small line appeared beside the case number. Charge dismissed. No prosecution. No conviction. No sentence had ever existed. Yet the system continued to mark Darius as a criminal, and in that moment, Celeste understood something for the first time. A process did not need to hate anyone in order to destroy that person's life. It only needed to be designed never to look back. Celeste had not been born inside glass offices. Her childhood belonged to a small house on the south side of Milwaukee. where winter air slipped through the door frames and left a thin layer of frost on the inside of the windows. Her father, Walter Rowan, worked as a mechanic at a factory that manufactured agricultural equipment. He was tall, quiet, and always returned home carrying the smell of heated steel, lubricating oil, and cold air in his heavy coat. Every evening, before entering the kitchen, Walter removed his work boots at the door. He did not do it because he was afraid of dirtying the floor. He said metal dust should never be carried near the dinner table. Celeste was 9 years old then. She often sat beneath the staircase, waiting for her father to hang his factory locker key on a nail beside the door. It was a small brass key with worn teeth, attached to a blue plastic tag engraved with the number 217. To Celeste, that key meant her father still had a job. It meant there would be meat in the stew that weekend, medicine for her mother's aching joints, money for a school field trip, and a man who would return at the end of the day, place his rough hand on his daughter's head, and ask what new thing she had learned. Walter did not have a college degree. He read slowly and often followed the small print in letters with one finger. But he could hear an engine running from outside the building and know which bearing was about to fail. He could take apart a transmission, arrange every component on an old cloth, and reassemble it without leaving behind a single bolt. He often placed damaged machine parts in front of Celeste and asked her to find the cause of the failure. Celeste rarely guessed correctly. Walter never laughed. He simply turned the piece in his hand, pointed to a hairline crack or a burned contact point, and explained that machines did not stop without warning. They always told you first. Most people simply refused to listen until it was too late. When Celeste was 12, the factory announced that it would reduce overtime pay while increasing mandatory overtime. The workers protested. They were not demanding wealth. They wanted to be paid properly for the hours they worked and to keep health insurance for their families. Walter was not an organizer. He was not the man standing on a wooden crate giving speeches. He signed a petition and stood beside his co-workers outside the factory gate on a morning so cold that their breath froze against their scarves. The strike began peacefully. Then, a delivery truck attempted to force its way through the line. People shouted, bodies pushed against one another. A police officer fell when the crowd shifted. No one knew who had touched him first, but Walter was the tallest man standing nearby. He was handcuffed in front of the factory gate. Celeste saw it on the evening news. Her father's image remained on the screen for only a few seconds. His hands were locked behind his back, his work coat stretched across his shoulders. An officer held his head down while pushing him into a vehicle. The caption described him as a suspect in a riot and an assault on a police officer. Celeste's mother turned off the television too late. The image had already entered her daughter's mind. Walter was released the following morning. 3 weeks later, prosecutors dismissed the charges after security video from a nearby store showed that he had never struck anyone. But the factory did not wait for the truth. It fired him on the day of his arrest. The letter said his conduct had endangered the company's reputation. Walter brought the letter home, inside a white envelope. He read it 3 times at the kitchen table. Each time, his back curved a little farther forward. The following day, he went to collect the belongings from his locker. After a security guard opened the gate, the brass key was placed back into Walter's palm. It no longer opened anything. Walter hung it on the nail beside the door, as he had every evening. But that night, he did not remove his work boots. He was no longer wearing them. During the weeks that followed, Walter applied to every factory within 50 miles. He had 23 years of experience. No criminal record, no conviction, but every employer saw the arrest. Every manager said the application needed further review. Then, the phone never rang. Walter began taking small repair jobs in neighbors' garages. The money arrived one small bill at a time. The family's health insurance expired at the end of the month. Celeste's mother, Margaret, had an autoimmune illness that caused her hands to swell and ache. Before the insurance disappeared, medication allowed her to continue working in the school library. Afterward, every pill became a calculation: the electric bill, food. or enough medication for Margaret to move her fingers without clenching her teeth against the pain. Celeste heard her parents speaking at night. Their voices were so quiet, they were almost only breath. Walter said he was innocent. Margaret answered that innocence did not mean anyone would give him a job. One evening, Celeste went downstairs for water and found her father sitting alone in the dark. The locker key lay on the table in front of him. Walter turned it between two fingers. Streetlight reflected from the blue tag, making the number 217 appear. Celeste asked why he still kept it. Walter remained silent for a long time. Then he said it was proof that there had once been a time when he belonged somewhere. Celeste never forgot that answer, but she did not understand it in the way her father had hoped. She did not see a man judged by a system before the truth could speak. She saw a family destroyed because a protest had escaped control. She saw chaos, accusations, arbitrary decisions, and powerful people choosing convenience over fairness. Margaret often sat with her daughter at the kitchen table, correcting Walter's applications and checking every line. She always told Celeste that emotion could not protect a family. Truth could not protect itself either. Only a clear process could force people to treat one another fairly. Processes don't favor anyone, Margaret said. People do. Celeste carried those words for years. She carried them into college, where she studied on a scholarship and worked nights in a warehouse. She carried them into her first freight company, where a manager laughed when she said she wanted to run a trucking route. She carried them through banks that refused to lend her money, through meetings where men repeated her ideas and received the praise. Whenever people doubted her, Celeste did not argue. She created a spreadsheet, a schedule, a system that could prove she was right without requiring anyone to believe in her. Process became Celeste's armor. Then it became her religion. She stopped using it to protect people from prejudice. She began believing that if people were removed from decisions, prejudice would disappear with them. Years after Walter died, Celeste found the locker key inside an old metal box. The blue tag was cracked at one corner. The number 217 had nearly worn flat. She carried it inside a small compartment in her handbag, though she rarely took it out. No one on the board knew that the billionaire carried a key that no longer opened any door. The morning Darius Bell was rejected, the key was still in her bag. When Celeste saw the words, "Charge dismissed," on the screen, her fingers moved unconsciously toward the cold piece of metal. For one brief moment, she was no longer standing inside a recruitment center worth tens of millions of dollars. She was 12 years old again, sitting in front of a small television, watching her father being handcuffed for a crime he had not committed, hearing her mother say that processes did not favor anyone. But this time, Celeste was forced to confront what she had avoided for 37 years. Her father had not been destroyed because there was no process. He had been destroyed by a process that did not care whether it was wrong. And now Celeste had built a larger, faster, colder version of the door that had once closed in Walter Rowan's face. Darius Bell was 39 years old. Before his name became a red warning on a recruitment screen, Darius had been the man factories called when everyone else had run out of answers. He specialized in industrial electrical maintenance. Conveyor belts stopped during the night shift. Control panels began to smell burned. Motors shook, as though they were about to tear through their metal housings. Darius could stand amid the roar of machinery, place 2 fingers against the side of an electrical cabinet, and identify the problem from a slight vibration. He was not an engineer with a private office. He had no framed degree hanging on a wall. What Darius had was 17 years of experience, 3 trade certifications, a toolbox arranged precisely down to each socket, and hands that knew how to make things move again after they had stopped. Inside his work shirt pocket, he always carried an orange wire connector. It was worth only a few cents. The plastic was scratched. One corner had been darkened by heat. Darius had kept it since the first day of his vocational class at a community technical school. His instructor had placed the burned connector on a table and said that an assembly line worth millions of dollars could sometimes stop because 2 wires were no longer touching correctly. Darius was 22 years old. He kept the object as a reminder. No system failed all at once. It always began with one bad connection no one was willing to repair. For many years, Darius's life ran smoothly enough. He worked the morning shift at a refrigeration equipment factory in Rockford. He usually left home before Nia woke and returned while she was doing homework at the kitchen table. Nia's mother had left their lives when the child was very young. There had been no violent breakup, no villain for Darius to hate, only a young woman who understood that she could not continue being a mother in the way everyone expected. She moved to another state and gradually became a series of increasingly rare phone calls. Darius never told Nia that her mother had abandoned her. He said that adults sometimes wandered very far away and did not yet know how to find the road home. From that point on, Darius's life was divided into 2 shifts. One shift at the factory. The second began when he picked Nia up from her after-school program. He learned to braid hair by watching videos after midnight. He learned the difference between an ordinary cough and the wheezing sound that meant Nia's asthma was becoming dangerous. He learned how to wash a sweater without shrinking it, and how to sign school papers with one hand while stirring a pot of noodles with the other. Darius was not a perfect father. He once forgot a school theme day. He once burned a birthday cake after falling asleep in a chair. He once became angry when Nia drew on the electric bill with crayons. Then he sat down and apologized because he understood that he was angry at the numbers on the paper, not at the child in front of him. But Nia never doubted that her father loved her. To her, Darius was a man who could repair anything, a flickering nightlight, a jammed zipper on a backpack. That belief once made him feel strong. Later, it became the thing that frightened him most. Some things could not be repaired with pliers, an electrical meter, or his hands. Everything changed near the end of October. Darius had just completed a 10-hour shift when he received a call from the school nurse. Nia was struggling to breathe. The emergency inhaler at school was empty. Darius drove to a 24-hour pharmacy to collect her prescription. When he stepped outside, he saw 2 police vehicles blocking the parking lot. A man had robbed an electronics store several blocks away. Witnesses described the suspect as a tall black man wearing a dark work jacket and driving a silver pickup truck. Darius was a black man. He was tall. He wore a dark blue work jacket, and beneath the parking lot lights, his old pickup looked almost silver. The officers ordered Darius to place the medicine bag on the ground. He obeyed. They ordered him to put his hands on his head. He obeyed. He tried to explain that his daughter was waiting for the medication at school. An officer told him to stop talking. A bystander raised a phone and began recording. In the video that spread online the next morning, people saw Darius pressed against the hood of his truck, with his hands cuffed behind his back. A white paper bag lay near his feet. No one saw Nia's name on the prescription label. No one heard Darius ask whether an officer could take the inhaler to his daughter. He was held overnight. The next morning, police found the real suspect's vehicle inside an abandoned warehouse. Security footage from the pharmacy confirmed that Darius had been paying for the medicine when the robbery occurred. The charge was dismissed. There was no trial, no conviction, only a document stating that prosecutors would not continue the case. Darius carried that paper home and believed the matter was over. He was wrong. The factory suspended him when the video appeared online. Human Resources said the company needed to wait for an internal review. Darius sent proof that the charge had been dismissed. The company answered that his position involved dangerous equipment and that it could not accept the reputational risk. 2 weeks later, he was dismissed. The letter never called him a criminal. It used clean, lawful phrases: workforce restructuring, suitability assessment, protection of the workplace environment. Darius read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it, placed it inside the kitchen drawer, and took Nia for the ice cream he had promised her. She did not know that her father had just lost the job he had held for 11 years. She only knew that Darius let her choose 2 flavors that day. During the first month, Darius believed his experience would save him. He revised his resume, called former supervisors, applied to factories, distribution centers, and maintenance companies throughout the region. He passed initial interviews, passed technical assessments. Some companies even asked whether he could begin on Monday. Then the background report arrived. The phone became silent. Rejection emails appeared. Some companies never answered at all. Darius called the courthouse. The court said its records had been updated. He called the police department. The police said the matter was closed. He called the company that supplied the background report. A recorded voice instructed him to mail a dispute form along with copies of his identification, fingerprints, and court documents. Darius sent everything. 6 weeks later, the report still stated that he had been convicted. His name no longer belonged to him. It belonged to databases that did not speak to one another. One system said, dismissed. Another said, arrested. Another left the final result blank. The recruitment software read only the worst line. Darius's unemployment assistance was not enough to cover rent, electricity, food, and Nia's medication. He sold his old speakers, the lawnmower, 2 specialized power tools he had once promised never to let anyone touch. The pickup truck began making a knocking sound beneath the hood. Darius heard the problem every morning, but could not afford the parts. He continued driving because without a vehicle, he could not attend interviews. 3 months later, his bank account contained $142. 11 unpaid bills were held to the refrigerator by magnets. He had submitted 63 job applications, attended 14 interviews, completed 9 skills tests, and received no formal offers. Darius began eating once a day. He told Nia he was not hungry in the morning. At lunch, he said he had eaten while she was at school. At dinner, he moved the meat from his plate to hers and claimed a doctor had once told him that adults should not eat too much. Nia believed him for several weeks. Then she began leaving half of her sandwich inside her lunchbox. She brought it home, placed it on the table, and said she no longer liked cheese. Darius knew she was lying. He also knew his daughter had learned to lie in order to protect him. That hurt more than hunger. The night before his assessment at Rowan Freight, Nia suffered an asthma attack. Her primary inhaler contained only a few doses. Darius's insurance had expired when he lost his job. He sat beside his daughter's bed, counting every breath in the darkness and trying not to think about the cost of another prescription. After Nia finally fell asleep, Darius removed the orange connector from his pocket. He turned it beneath the nightlight. One bad connection could stop an entire system. But before anyone could repair it, someone had to be willing to open the panel and look inside. The following morning, Darius wore the only white shirt that still fit him. He pressed it with an iron that often leaked water. Nia sat on the bed and watched her father tie his necktie. She asked whether getting this job meant they would not have to move. Darius's hands stopped. The landlord had delivered a final notice 3 days earlier. Nia was not supposed to know. But children always hear the things adults try to say quietly. Darius turned, straightened his daughter's collar, and told her he would do his best that day. Nia thought for a moment. Then she asked, in a very serious voice, "If you do everything right, will they let you be a good person again?" The question followed Darius all the way to the recruitment center. It stayed beside him as he completed the assessment, almost perfectly. It stayed beside him when the screen turned red, and it stayed beside him when he led his daughter out of the building, unaware that behind the glass, a powerful woman had finally begun to see what every previous system had refused to examine. Darius Bell did not need an opportunity to become a good man again. He had never stopped being one. What he needed was a system honest enough to admit that it was wrong. Celeste remained in front of the screen, long after the doors below had closed behind Darius and Nia. The report had not changed. The man's name remained at the top. The warning was still red. The arrest was still listed, as though it were a conviction, even though the dismissal appeared beside it. Celeste read every line again. She read more slowly than she read financial reports. She did not skim. She did not search for the conclusion. She did not ignore the small print. The incident date matched the night Darius had been arrested outside the pharmacy. He had been detained for less than a day. The prosecutor had closed the case after his alibi was confirmed. There had been no trial, no guilty plea, no sentence. but the background data company had assigned the wrong outcome code. Risk Protocol 4.2 did not cross-check it. The system saw a serious charge and closed the door before a human being could ask a question. Celeste placed both hands against the edge of the desk. Her fingers were cold. Inside her handbag, Walter Rowan's locker key touched the metal side of her phone and made a faint sound. She took it out. The old blue tag rested in her palm. The number 217 was almost impossible to read. Celeste remembered her father sitting at the kitchen table, turning that key between his fingers after the factory fired him. Walter had not been convicted either. He had also been told that the record had been clarified, but no one returned to reopen the door they had closed. 37 years earlier, Celeste had watched her father become a problem that companies did not want to spend time examining. That morning, Darius Bell had become the same kind of problem. The only difference was that this door carried her name. The recruitment supervisor stood several steps away. He did not know whether to leave or continue waiting. Finally, he said that this was probably a rare data error. Human Resources could submit a review request early the following week. If the vendor confirmed the mistake, Darius could submit another application during the next recruitment cycle. Celeste looked up. When is the next recruitment cycle? The supervisor checked his tablet. About 3 months from now. 3 months. In corporate language, it was only a quarter. 3 reporting periods, 12 weeks of operation. A length of time small enough to fit inside one box on a calendar, but Celeste remembered the asthma medicine inside Darius's pocket. She remembered Nia's feet not reaching the floor. She remembered the child asking whether people would allow her father to become a good person again. 3 months was not a quarter to Darius. It could mean 3 rent payments, 30 dinners, during which he pretended not to be hungry, a prescription that was never purchased, an eviction notice, or a night when Nia could not breathe and her father no longer had enough money to take her to an emergency room. Celeste's stomach tightened. She had heard thousands of managers explain delays with the same phrases: early next week, the next cycle, the next recruitment period, wait for the system to update. Those phrases sounded harmless when the person speaking still had a salary, a home, and health insurance. Celeste asked who had authority to change the decision. The supervisor said the center had none. Regional Human Resources had none either. Every application flagged by Risk Protocol 4.2 was transferred to Central Compliance. That department reviewed a decision only if the applicant submitted a complete dispute within 48 hours. Was Mr. Bell told that? The supervisor became silent. Celeste looked at the applicant card on the desk. The front showed only the red mark and the words, "Applicant ineligible." There were no instructions, no contact address. Not one sentence explaining that the rejected applicant had a right to see the report that had judged him. He wasn't told, Celeste said. It was no longer a question. The supervisor explained that applicants usually received an automated email within 3 to 5 business days. Celeste turned back toward the screen. The system gave Darius 48 hours to appeal, but it waited at least 3 days to tell him that an appeal existed. The contradiction was so obvious that Celeste could not understand how she had never seen it. Then she remembered. She had never been seated on the other side of the red words. Celeste ordered the entire report printed. The machine began running. Warm pages slid into the tray. The first contained personal information. The second showed employment history. The third listed the arrest. The fourth displayed the incorrectly recorded outcome. The final page contained the policy approval. Celeste Rowan's name appeared beneath the issue date. Her electronic signature was sharp and decisive. She looked at it as though it belonged to a stranger. 3 years earlier, Celeste had signed because the report said the system would protect the company. No one had clearly explained how it would protect the company. No one had asked her to look into the faces of the people who would be rejected. No one had placed a father in front of her and asked whether a wrongful arrest should be enough to deny him work for the rest of his life. But the signature was hers. Ignorance did not make it lighter. Celeste folded the papers. She asked the supervisor for the address Darius had provided. He immediately shook his head. Applicant information could not be shared outside its authorized recruitment purpose. Celeste looked at him. This time, the man did not retreat. He explained that it was a privacy rule. For the first time that morning, Celeste understood that the man in front of her was not a villain. He was doing exactly what she had taught the entire company to do. No flexibility. No assumptions. No action beyond assigned authority. Follow the process, even after the process had just proved it could be wrong. Celeste did not order him to violate the rule. She asked whether the application contained a telephone number. The supervisor said the recruitment center was allowed to call an applicant to clarify information. Celeste pushed the desk phone toward him. Call. They called 3 times. No one answered. On the 4th attempt, the call went to voicemail. The supervisor began to leave a standard message. Celeste raised one hand and stopped him. She took the receiver herself. For several seconds, she did not know what to say. Celeste Rowan had spoken before conferences filled with thousands of people. She had persuaded banks to extend credit when the company had enough money to survive only 11 more days. She had faced a board during a crisis and kept every director seated. But she had never called a man to tell him that her signature had helped take away his ability to buy medicine for his child. The tone sounded. Celeste left her name. She did not mention her title. She did not mention her wealth. She said only that she had witnessed what happened at the recruitment center, that she had read the report, that she knew Darius had been rejected incorrectly, and that she wanted to meet him. Then Celeste returned the receiver to its cradle. The supervisor asked whether he should notify the communications department. It was a familiar reflex inside a large corporation. When something went wrong, people did not first ask how it should be repaired. They asked how the story would look if it became public. Celeste looked at the red applicant card. No, she did not want a photographer standing beside Darius. She did not want a press release turning his desperation into proof of the company's generosity. She did not want Rowan Freight praised for correcting a mistake it had created. Celeste cancelled every appointment on her schedule. Her assistant called almost immediately. There was an investor meeting. A call about an expansion deal. Lunch with the board chairman. Celeste postponed them all. She did not explain. For the first time in years, she left a Rowan Freight facility without entering the car waiting in front. She walked across the parking lot. Cold wind moved between the rows of vehicles. Near the fence, Celeste saw a small oil stain on the pavement and old tire marks leading through the gate. Darius was gone. Perhaps he was driving to another interview. Perhaps he was calculating whether he had enough money to buy fuel. Perhaps he was answering Nia's question with a gentle lie, the way parents often do when the truth is too heavy for a child. Celeste tightened her hand around Walter's key. The metal edge pressed into her skin. She did not release it. The small pain reminded her that this was not a chart, not a technical error, not an isolated case that could be corrected by changing Darius's name from red to green. If one false report could travel through the entire system without anyone stopping it, then the problem was not a single line of data. The problem was a company built to believe that machines were always more trustworthy than people. Celeste turned and went back inside. She did not return to the observation level. She did not enter a conference room. She went down to the storage area, where rejected records were transferred before being automatically removed from the recruitment list. The data manager asked what she was looking for. Celeste placed Darius's report on the desk. She wanted to know how many other people had been rejected for the same reason. Not how many had criminal convictions. Not how many were considered risks. How many had been arrested, never convicted, and still treated as criminals by Rowan Freight. The manager looked at Celeste, then at her signature on the policy. He said, retrieving that information would require authorization from legal counsel. Celeste pulled out a chair and sat down. Then call them. She did not return to her office. She did not assign the work to an assistant. She did not ask consultants to write a summary. Celeste sat in the windowless room beneath cold white lights and waited for the records to open, one by one. Darius Bell had left the building. But this time, Celeste Rowan would not allow the system to close his file and pretend he had never entered. The data search began at 10:17 that morning. By noon, Celeste was still sitting in the windowless storage room. Her grey coat hung over the back of the chair. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. On the table were Darius Bell's report, her father's old locker key, and a screen slowly filling with names. At first, there were only a few dozen records, then several hundred. Then the number passed 1,000. The data manager, Adrian Cole, stood beside the server, with his hands folded in front of him. He had worked for Rowan Freight for 14 years. His hair was beginning to turn grey at the temples. A plastic hospital bracelet remained around his wrist from taking his mother to a medical appointment the night before. Adrian did not look like a man hiding a secret. He looked like someone who had spent too many years turning complicated questions into spreadsheets simple enough for executives to review during short meetings. When the first search finished, Adrian turned the screen towards Celeste. During the 3 years since Risk Protocol 4.2 had been introduced, 4,812 applicants had been automatically rejected because of criminal justice data. Celeste studied the number. It did not surprise her. A company with tens of thousands of employees always produced large numbers. She asked how many applicants had confirmed convictions relevant to the jobs they sought. Adrian did not answer immediately. He opened another layer of data. 2,946 records contained clear conviction outcomes. 673 contained no final case disposition. 1,146 showed arrest data, but no conviction. The remaining 47 contained names that did not fully match the applicant, yet the system had flagged them because of similar birth dates or previous addresses. Celeste looked up. 1,146 people who were never convicted. Adrian looked at the figures again. We cannot say that every one of them was never convicted. We can only say that their reports contain no conviction outcome. Celeste understood the distinction in his language. It was the language of compliance. It did not say that a person was innocent. It said only that the data was insufficient to prove guilt. But Celeste's system had not offered those people the same caution. It did not say that the data was insufficient to reject them. It rejected them first, then required the rejected person to prove that the machine was wrong. Celeste asked how many records had received human review before a final decision was sent. 327 people had submitted disputes. 89 had delivered every required document before the deadline. 41 decisions had been corrected, less than 1% of all flagged cases. Celeste watched the rows of numbers move down the screen. More than 1,000 people may have been treated as criminals without convictions. Only 41 had made it through the maze and forced the company to look again. She asked why so few applicants filed disputes. Adrian opened the automated email. It was sent 3 to 5 days after rejection. The message contained a link to an instruction page. The page was almost 2,000 words long. The right to dispute appeared in the 17th paragraph. An applicant had to download a form, print it, sign it by hand, attach copies of identification, then mail everything by certified post to an address in another state. The deadline began when the system created its decision, not when the applicant received the notice. Celeste read the instructions twice. A person without a printer had to find one. A person without money had to pay for copies and postage. A person without a vehicle had to travel to a courthouse and obtain records. A person already searching for work had to complete every step before the company officially told them they had the right to do so. That was not an appeals process. It was a door painted on a wall so the company could claim an exit existed. Adrian explained that the legal department had approved the procedure. Celeste asked who designed it. Most of the process had been proposed by the data vendor, a company called ClearPath Screening. Rowan Freight had shortened the response period to match the speed of recruitment. Why 48 hours? Warehouse positions cannot remain vacant for long. If an applicant does not clarify the record in time, the system moves to the next person. Celeste looked at Adrian. The next person. 2 clean words. No room for Nia. No asthma medicine. No nights when a father counted his daughter's breaths. Only an empty position to be filled by someone less complicated. Celeste asked who monitored the quality of ClearPath's data. Adrian said it was the responsibility of Human Resources Compliance. The head of that department was Malcolm Voss. Celeste knew him. Malcolm usually sat 3 seats away from her during risk meetings. He spoke little, wore dark suits, and always carried a bound notebook. In 3 years, his department had never exceeded its budget. Celeste called Malcolm. He was attending a virtual conference in Dallas. She did not order him to fly back. Instead, she obtained the address of ClearPath's processing center, collected her coat, and drove there herself. No driver, no assistant, no one from communications. The processing center occupied a low building inside an industrial district on the west side of the city. Its sign was so small that Celeste drove past it once before realizing she had arrived. Inside, there were none of the modern displays shown in the vendors' promotional videos. There were long rows of desks, employees wearing headsets, document scanners operating continuously, white lighting that made every face appear pale. Malcolm had called ahead. An operations manager named Lena Ortiz met Celeste at the entrance. Lena was around 50. She wore a brown sweater and an employee badge, worn around the edges. She shook Celeste's hand with the caution of someone who knew that the visitor in front of her could terminate a contract supporting hundreds of people in the building. Celeste gave Lena Darius's report. Lena examined the case number and led her to the far end of the room. The record had been processed by an employee named Ethan Marr. Ethan was 26. He worked from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon and was expected to complete an average of 180 reports each day. On Ethan's desk were a water bottle, a photograph of a baby, and a reminder about a daycare payment. He did not know who Darius was. He did not remember seeing the name. He did not remember the arrest. He did not remember the line saying the charge had been dismissed. To Ethan, Darius's record was one of hundreds that passed across his screen that day. Lena opened the activity history. The arrest data had been pulled from a county criminal justice database. The final disposition field was empty. The software automatically suggested the code, unverified conviction. Ethan had 2 options: accept the recommendation or pause the report and request additional documents. If he paused it, his processing time increased. If his average processing time exceeded the target, his performance rating fell. If it remained low for 3 consecutive months, he lost his bonus. Ethan clicked accept. It took 4 seconds. 4 seconds for a man to lose a job. 4 seconds for a child to ask whether her father was a bad person. Celeste asked why Ethan had not opened the linked court document. He lowered his eyes. The document was 17 pages long. The download was slow. There had been more than 300 reports in the queue. A supervisor repeatedly reminded the team that the target had to be met before the shift ended. Ethan did not speak defiantly. He spoke like a man admitting a failure he knew was real but had never been permitted to treat as important. I thought that if something was wrong, the applicant would dispute it. Celeste looked at the young man. That was exactly what everyone inside the system believed. The employee entering data believed the review team would correct it. The review team believed the applicant would appeal. Human Resources believed the vendor was responsible for the information. The vendor believed the employer would examine the circumstances. And among all those beliefs, no one actually looked back. Lena explained that ClearPath followed the standards established by its clients. Rowan Freight demanded fast processing, a low reported error rate, and strict risk controls. We follow the contract, Lena said. Celeste was not angry with her. Lena had not created the philosophy behind Risk Protocol 4.2. Neither had Ethan, neither had Adrian, neither had the supervisor at the recruitment center. Each person held only one small section of the line. No one could see the entire machine, except Celeste, and for 3 years, she had chosen not to look. Celeste asked Lena to open 20 randomly selected reports that had been flagged because of arrest data. The first belonged to a woman arrested after calling the police about domestic violence. A charge of resisting an officer had been dismissed. The report still labeled her violent. The second belonged to a young man whose name matched someone convicted in another state. The fourth involved a man arrested during a protest and released without prosecution. The seventh belonged to a veteran detained because police had mistaken his vehicle for another. The 11th contained a birth date that did not match. The 16th had been expunged by a court, but an old copy remained inside a commercial database. Celeste did not finish all 20. At the 17th record, she rose from the chair. The room suddenly felt too hot. Her sweater stuck to her back beneath her coat. Her pulse beat hard inside her neck. She walked to a window at the end of the hallway. The glass would not open. Outside were a parking lot, a steel fence, and a grey sky. Celeste placed her palm against the window. She remembered Walter Rowan holding a key that no longer opened anything. She remembered him calling factory after factory. She remembered every promise to review his application and every phone that never rang. For years, Celeste had believed her father was the victim of arbitrary people. Now she understood that he had also been the victim of something more dangerous. A system that allowed everyone to perform their assigned task correctly, while the final result remained completely wrong. Malcolm Voss appeared on a monitor inside a small conference room. He had reviewed Adrian's figures. His face was tense. Malcolm did not deny the errors. He warned that suspending Risk Protocol 4.2 would delay hiring for thousands of positions. The company could incur tens of millions of dollars in costs. Some customers required strict screening standards. The board would demand a legal risk assessment before any action. Celeste sat across from the screen. Did you know the system could confuse an arrest with a conviction? Malcolm paused. He said the risk had been disclosed in the implementation documents. Did you tell me? It was in the report you signed. The answer was difficult to hear, but it was true. Celeste could not transfer all responsibility to one employee, one vendor, or one legal department. She had been warned. She had not read it. The meeting had been 7 minutes late. Celeste asked why no one had examined the rate of corrected records during the 3 years that followed. Malcolm explained that the system's primary performance measures were recruitment speed, cost, and post-employment violations. No measure counted innocent people who had been rejected. The company measured mistakes that harmed the company. It did not measure mistakes that harmed other people. Celeste looked at Walter's key on the table. Then, at Darius's report, 1,146 records, 41 corrected decisions. More than 1,000 people buried beneath the color red, with no one knowing where they went after they walked out the door. Celeste ordered Malcolm to suspend every rejection based on an arrest record without a confirmed final outcome. Malcolm said he needed a written authorization from legal counsel. Celeste said the written authorization would follow. He reminded her that she could not change a company-wide process because of one case. Celeste looked directly into the screen. This is no longer one case. She turned to Lena. Clear path was to preserve every record, delete nothing, retain the activity histories, transfer every related file to a separate server for audit. Then Celeste ordered Rowan Freight to contact the applicants rejected during the previous 3 years. Lena warned that the contact information was protected. Celeste nodded. She was not asking anyone to remove it from the system. She was ordering Rowan Freight to send the notices itself. Not another 2,000-word email. Not another link hidden in paragraph 17. One clear statement. The company may have made a decision using incomplete information. Your record will be reviewed again at no cost to you. Malcolm asked who would approve the expense. Celeste would. Who would accept responsibility? If the board objected, Celeste would. Who would explain it to investors? Celeste would. Do that as well. But before any notice was sent, she needed to find Darius Bell. Not to ask for forgiveness. Not to hand him a job and pretend everything was repaired. She needed to tell him something her father had waited his entire life to hear from someone in power. The system was wrong. And the person whose signature had authorized it understood that she was responsible. Celeste called Darius again. This time, someone answered. It was not Darius. It was Nia. The child's voice was very quiet. She said her father was outside in the parking lot, trying to repair a truck that would not start. Celeste tightened her hand around the phone. She asked where they were. Nia read the name of a motel near the highway. Behind the child's voice were the sound of metal striking metal, the whistle of wind, and a long, dry cough. Celeste wrote down the address. Then she left the processing center. Rain had begun outside. It was not heavy, only small, cold, persistent drops, enough to blur the streets behind the windshield. Celeste drove toward the motel alone. Walter's key was inside her pocket. Darius's report rested on the passenger seat, and behind her were more than 1,000 records that had just been reopened. For the first time in 30 years of running Rowan Freight, Celeste did not know what would happen when she arrived. She knew only that this time, she would not send someone else to knock on the door. The motel stood beside the highway, between a closed tire shop and an empty lot covered in weeds. 2 letters were missing from the sign. A weak blue light flickered in daylight, as though it too was about to lose power. Celeste parked near the final room in the row. She recognized Darius's pickup immediately. The hood was open. Darius leaned over the engine compartment. The sleeves of the white shirt he had worn to the assessment were rolled above his elbows. His necktie lay on the front seat. Both hands were dark with oil. A small toolbox stood open near his feet, but many of its compartments were empty. Celeste remembered that Darius had sold his specialized tools to pay bills. She stood beside the vehicle for several seconds before speaking. Darius raised his head. Surprise appeared on his face only briefly. Then it became caution. He recognized Celeste. Not because they had met before, but because her face appeared on posters inside the recruitment center, on the company website, and in the introductory video every applicant watched before the assessment. Darius placed the wrench down. He did not clean his hands. "How did you find me?" "I called the number in your application," Nia answered. Darius immediately looked toward the motel room. Behind a narrow opening in the curtain, the child's shadow stood near the window. She shouldn't give an address to a stranger. "You're right." Celeste did not defend herself by saying she owned the company. She did not say that her employees were authorized to contact applicants. She stood in the light rain and admitted that Darius was right. That caused him to pause, but not long enough for his caution to disappear. Celeste took the report from the passenger seat. She did not approach too closely. "Your report contains an error." Darius looked at the papers, not at Celeste. "I know. I saw that the charge was dismissed. I sent that paper to 6 other companies. Rowan Freight treated it as a conviction. So did the others." His voice was not loud. Its calmness made every sentence heavier. Celeste had prepared herself for anger. She had not prepared herself for exhaustion. Anger still believes the person standing opposite can change something. Exhaustion comes after someone has explained the truth so many times that he no longer believes his words will reach anyone. Celeste said she had suspended the rejection and reopened his record. Darius gave a brief laugh. There was no amusement in it. "So I have the job?" Celeste stopped. She could have said yes. One phone call would have been enough. One signature. A newly created position. An advance payment. Company-funded housing. Those things were easier for Celeste than standing in the rain and admitting the whole truth. But she understood that if she hired Darius immediately, he might never know whether he had been chosen for his skill or because a billionaire wanted relief from her conscience. "Your assessment will be reviewed without the incorrect data," Celeste said. "If you meet the standard, you will be considered like every other applicant." For the first time since the conversation began, Darius looked directly at her. "Like every other applicant?" He pointed toward the report. "You think I was treated like them from the beginning?" Celeste did not answer. Darius closed the toolbox. He said he did not need another test. He did not need anyone to confirm that he knew how to perform work he had done for almost 20 years. And he did not need a wealthy woman to come to his motel and inform him that the system had made a small mistake. "It wasn't a small mistake," Celeste said. "Maybe not to you." Darius looked at the truck that would not start. "To me, it was rent, food, my daughter's medicine." Celeste thought of Walter, but she did not mention her father. This was not the moment to use her own pain to make Darius more sympathetic toward her. "I signed that policy," Celeste said. Darius became silent. "Not a junior manager, not a piece of software that appeared by itself. I approved it. I was warned that the data might not distinguish an arrest from a conviction. I did not read carefully. Rain settled in Celeste's hair. Water moved down the collar of her coat. She did not wipe it away. "The meeting was running 7 minutes late," she said. "I skipped the warning page to save time." Darius looked at her as though trying to decide whether the statement was an insult. 7 minutes in Celeste's schedule had become months in his life. 7 minutes had allowed the system to spread across hundreds of facilities. 7 minutes stood between Naya and her asthma medicine. Darius turned back toward the engine. "I don't know what you expect me to say. I didn't come to ask you to say anything. Then why are you here?" Celeste looked at the motel room behind him. The curtain moved slightly. Nia was still watching. "I came to tell you, to your face, that my company was wrong." Darius tightened his hand around the wrench. "And then? I'm going to repair the system. You're going to repair my record, not only yours." Darius shook his head. He had heard promises like that from attorneys, court employees, and data representatives. They always began broadly. Then they became an email, a link, a phone number no one answered. "Do you know what frightens me most?" he asked. Celeste waited. "That my daughter becomes the little girl in your company's success story. That you fix one record, take a photograph, and tell everyone your company believes in second chances." Celeste did not interrupt. Darius had reason to believe that. Her companies had launched charity campaigns using carefully selected photographs. They had presented scholarships in front of cameras. They had turned donations smaller than the cost of the event into stories about corporate responsibility. Celeste had never considered those campaigns dishonest. Not until she stood before someone who did not want his pain transformed into promotional material. "There are no cameras," she said. "No press release. No one except me knows I'm here." "Then you should leave." Celeste nodded. She placed a business card on the lid of his toolbox. Darius did not pick it up. Celeste returned to her vehicle. Before opening the door, she stopped. "I don't expect you to trust me today." Darius did not look at her. Celeste drove away. The card remained on the toolbox beneath the rain. By evening, the water had bent its corners. Darius did not throw it away. The following morning, Rowan Freight sent him an email. It was not a job offer. It was a complete copy of the background report, the source documents, and an official statement confirming that the data used by the company was incomplete. There was no apology written by the communications department, only Celeste Rowan's name, and one sentence. "The company will pay every necessary cost to correct the data, but the decision to participate belongs entirely to you." Darius did not respond. On the third day, Celeste returned to the motel. She did not bring money. She did not bring a contract. She brought a folder containing courthouse addresses, correction forms, and the name of an independent legal organization that received no funding from Rowan Freight. Darius was sitting on the front step, trying to repair the strap on Naya's backpack. He looked at the folder, then at Celeste. He did not invite her inside. But he did not tell her to leave immediately. Celeste went to the county records office herself. An employee there confirmed that Darius's court record had been corrected. But the data had been sent to ClearPath before the case was closed and had never been synchronized again. No agency was responsible for automatically sending the updated outcome. The private company was expected to request it. The private company assumed the applicant would request it. Each side waited for the other. Darius remained trapped inside the space between them. Celeste brought the stamped record to the motel. This time, Darius accepted it. He still did not invite her inside, but he did not ask her to leave. On the 6th day, Celeste returned. She told Darius that Rowan Freight had suspended every rejection based on incomplete arrest data. How long? Until the audit is complete. And after that, I don't know yet. Then you haven't fixed anything. Celeste nodded. Not yet. Darius appeared surprised that she did not argue. Powerful people often described temporary action as reform. Celeste was beginning to understand that admitting something was insufficient required more courage than declaring success. 1 week later, she asked Darius to visit Rowan Freight headquarters and review a draft of the new policy. He refused. She mailed him a copy. Darius read it at night after Nia fell asleep. The document was 19 pages long. It was filled with phrases such as, suitability assessment, risk balancing, and case-by-case consideration. Darius used a red pen to mark nearly half of it. Beside a paragraph saying the company may allow an applicant to explain, he wrote that the right to be heard should not depend upon a recruiter's kindness. Beside a 5-day deadline, he wrote that courts did not operate according to the human resources calendar. Beside the phrase reputational risk, he wrote that no one should lose a livelihood because a company feared an injury it could not even identify. Darius mailed the pages back without a note. 2 days later, Celeste brought a revised version. Every may had become must. The 5-day deadline was gone. The reputational risk provision no longer existed. You changed it because I wrote that? Because you were right. Did legal approve? No. Then they'll try to stop you. They already did. For the first time, Darius almost smiled. Almost. Celeste did not treat it as a victory. Trust did not return through one dramatic moment. It returned through small actions, repeated for long enough. A powerful person, arriving when she said she would. A document being corrected instead of defended. A promise kept away from social media. The person who caused the harm sitting quietly while the harmed person spoke. Darius still refused to accept a job at Rowan Freight. He said that if Celeste hired him immediately, everyone would view him as the owner's special case. Celeste understood. She arranged a second technical assessment before an independent panel. The panel members were not told the name of the person whose complaint had triggered the review. Darius agreed. He scored 99 out of 100, 1 point higher than the first time. 3 days later, Rowan Freight sent a formal offer. Darius placed the letter on the table. Nia sat across from him and followed each line with her finger. She did not understand every word, but she recognized the company symbol. Is it still red, Dad? Darius looked at the blue heading. He could have said no. He could have embraced his daughter and promised that everything was over. But he had learned that changing a color on paper did not mean the system had changed. Mine isn't, he said. But there are still a lot of other people. The following morning, Darius called Celeste. She answered on the first ring. He would accept the job on one condition: not a larger salary, not a bonus, not company-paid housing. Darius wanted a place on the team, rewriting the process that had rejected him, not as a public face, not as an inspirational speaker at shareholder meetings. He wanted the authority to read the policies, ask questions, and oppose the things senior leaders could not see. Celeste remained silent for several seconds. You want to be an advisor? Darius looked at the orange connector inside his palm. No, I want the power to say no. Celeste understood the difference. An advisor could be heard and then ignored. A person with the power to say no could force the system to stop. She agreed. But Darius was not finished. If you correct only my record, I'll resign. I know. If you use my daughter's name in any campaign, I'll speak publicly. I understand. If the new policy lasts only until the press loses interest, I'll tell everyone what happened. Celeste looked at Walter's key on her desk. You should. Darius became silent at the other end of the line. It was the first time he believed that Celeste was not trying to purchase his silence. She was giving him the power to break it. 1 week later, Darius entered Rowan Freight through the same door that had once closed in his face. There were no photographers, no applause, no welcome banner, only Nia walking beside him with the backpack her father had repaired. When they reached the security scanner, Darius stopped. His name appeared in green. But the first policy meeting revealed how much work remained. Around the conference table sat executives from legal, compliance, recruitment, operations, and finance. Several called the suspension temporary. They spoke about controlled pauses, risk exposure, operational continuity. Darius listened, then he circled the words temporary pause with a red pen. You call this a temporary pause, he said. People outside this building call it losing their rent. No one answered. Darius said nothing more. Celeste sat at the head of the table. She did not explain for him. She did not soften the statement. She did not change the subject. She allowed the silence to remain until everyone understood that for the first time, the consequences of the policy had a voice inside the room. During the weeks that followed, the review team opened every layer of Risk Protocol 4.2. Each layer appeared reasonable when examined alone. Screen data to reduce risk. Automate decisions to save time. Limit appeals to prevent recruitment delays. Use an outside vendor to reduce costs. No single step had been designed with the intention of destroying anyone. But together, they formed a hallway that went only one direction. The system could accuse. The applicant had to prove. The company had time. The job seeker did not. Celeste ordered the complete elimination of automatic rejection based on arrest records. A report without a confirmed final outcome would no longer turn an applicant's name red. It would turn yellow, not ineligible. Human review required. Every yellow record had to be read by 2 independent reviewers, one from compliance, one from outside the recruitment department. Both had to provide a specific written reason before rejecting an applicant. Vague phrases, such as reputational risk or poor cultural fit, were prohibited. Every decision had to relate directly to the job. An arrest without a conviction could not be treated as evidence of criminal conduct. A dismissed record could not be used in a decision. A similar name, mismatched birth date, or old address was no longer enough to flag a person. Darius reviewed every provision. He refused to allow the company to call the initiative a second chance program. Second chances are for people who did something wrong, he said. Many people on this list never received a first chance. The name was changed. The communications department had proposed second chance program. Darius called it the fair review standard. No pity, no favor, only the right to be judged according to the truth. Rowan Freight also ended its former agreement with ClearPath. But Celeste refused to use Ethan Marr or Lena Ortiz as sacrifices. She knew that dismissing a few employees would make the board feel better. It would create the appearance that the guilty parties had been identified. But Ethan had only been the man who clicked a button in 4 seconds. The forces guiding his hand were the targets, the contract, and a culture that treated speed as more important than verification. The new vendor was required to update court data regularly. Every alert had to include the source document. Employees processing reports were no longer rewarded solely for the number completed each hour. Performance ratings now included accuracy and the number of conflicting records an employee identified. For the first time, stopping to examine a record was not treated as being slow. It was treated as doing the job properly. The company opened an appeals line, answered by human beings. No more recorded instructions. No more forms that could be submitted only through the mail. Applicants could dispute information by telephone, email, or in person at a recruitment center. Every adverse notice had to include the report used in the decision, the name of the vendor, and clear instructions written in ordinary language. The appeal deadline no longer began when the system created the decision. It began on the date the applicant confirmed receiving the notice. Rowan Freight contacted the people rejected during the previous 3 years. The company did not promise them jobs. It promised only that a human being would read their records. For many, it was the smallest promise a company had ever made, and one of the most meaningful. Nia's life changed as well. After Darius began working, he could buy her asthma medication without counting the remaining doses. Father and daughter left the motel 7 weeks later. Their new apartment was not large. It had 2 bedrooms, a narrow balcony, and pipes that vibrated whenever the upstairs apartment opened a faucet. But Nia had a desk beside a window. Darius purchased a used toolbox. It was not the expensive set he once owned, but it was enough to fill the empty compartments. The orange connector remained inside his shirt pocket. He did not replace it with a new one. The burn mark on the plastic reminded him that repairing one connection did not mean the entire line was safe. 6 months later, complaints involving recruitment records had fallen by nearly 2/3. The average review time had increased from 4 minutes to 23. Recruitment costs rose by 8%. Some board members were unhappy. They asked Celeste whether the company was sacrificing efficiency for emotion. Celeste placed 2 reports on the table. One showed the increased cost. The other showed that turnover among new employees during their first 6 months had fallen by 14%. Maintenance teams had fewer staffing shortages. Accidents caused by inexperienced workers declined. The applicants once rejected by the old system had become the group with the highest retention rate. "We are not losing efficiency," Celeste said. We have simply stopped calling carelessness efficiency. No one applauded. Celeste did not need applause. A year earlier, she would have measured success through speed, cost, and profit. Now, the monthly operating report included 3 new measures: the number of records reviewed by people, the number of decisions corrected before causing harm, and the average time required for an applicant to receive a clear explanation. Celeste understood that the system could still be wrong. No process became ethical because of one update. But now, whenever it failed, it had to leave a trace. There had to be the name of someone responsible. There had to be a road back. And there had to be a moment when a human being had the authority to tell the machine to stop. One afternoon, Celeste arrived at a maintenance center without warning anyone. She saw Darius teaching a young employee how to inspect an electrical cabinet. The young man quickly reached toward the main switch. Darius stopped him. He told the employee to remain still and listen to the vibration behind the metal. "Don't look only at the indicator light," Darius said. "It tells you what the system decided. It doesn't tell you whether the decision was right." Celeste stood outside the doorway. Darius did not know she was listening. She placed one hand inside her pocket and touched the key, marked 217. For the first time in years, the object no longer felt like proof of a door that had closed. It had become a reminder that no door should remain locked forever simply because the person holding the key refused to return and check it. 1 year after Darius Bell had been ordered to leave Rowan Freight, he returned to the same recruitment center. The hallway was still long. The metal chairs remained against the wall. Behind the glass, the electronic board still glowed with rows of names and numbers, but the screen no longer displayed only green and red. A third color stood between them: yellow, human review required. Those 3 words had caused weeks of argument inside the boardroom. Executives said yellow would slow the process. It would create uncertainty. It would force managers to spend time on records that machines had once processed in seconds. Celeste had answered that those few seconds had taken months from Darius's life. The argument ended. Yellow remained. Darius had not returned to take another assessment. He was now a member of the independent review panel. The orange wire connector was still in his shirt pocket. Its plastic surface had become more worn. The burned corner remained unchanged. Nia came with her father. She was 9 now, taller. Her feet no longer swung above the floor when she sat on the metal chair. She carried a circuit model for her school science fair. A small bulb was connected to a battery by several colored wires. There was an unfinished gap in the middle of the circuit. Darius had promised to help her find the right connector after the meeting. When father and daughter passed the card scanner, Nia looked up. Darius's name appeared in green. She did not ask whether green meant her father was a good person. She understood now that no color on a computer had the authority to decide that. At the far end of the hallway, a man around 50 stood before the reception desk. His name was Lionel Graves. He had just completed a forklift assessment with a nearly perfect score. But the background report contained an arrest from 16 years earlier. There was no final outcome. The screen turned yellow. Lionel looked at the color, then at the recruiter. His shoulders immediately lowered. He knew this moment. He knew the way people avoided his eyes. The voice that said the system had already decided. The door closing before he could explain. But this time, the recruiter did not call security. She did not return the applicant card. She printed the report, placed it on the table, and said the information had to be verified before anyone made a decision. Darius approached. He did not sit across from Lionel. He pulled a chair to the man's side. They looked at the pages together. Darius asked whether Lionel recognized the incident. Lionel remained silent for a moment. Then he explained that police had once mistaken him for another man with the same last name. He had been released the following day, but no one had ever given him paperwork confirming that the matter was closed. Lionel waited for Darius to show doubt. Darius did not. They called the courthouse together. They requested the record. They waited. Celeste watched from the other side of the hallway. She did not step forward to speak. The story no longer required her to stand at its center. Nia sat in the chair where she had waited for her father 1 year earlier. She removed the circuit model from her bag. One wire had come loose, leaving the bulb dark. Darius was still speaking with Lionel, so Nia opened a small box of components. The maintenance team had given her several new connectors. She selected an orange one. She placed both wire ends inside it, tightened them, then pressed the switch. The small bulb came to life. Its light was not powerful. It illuminated only the hands of a child. But Celeste saw it from the other side of the hallway. She placed a hand inside her coat pocket. The locker key, marked 217, was still there. Years earlier, that key had been proof that her father had been pushed out of a place and never invited back. Now Celeste carried it for another reason. To remember that anyone who built a system was also responsible for creating a way back into it. 1 hour later, the court confirmed that Lionel had never been convicted. The screen beside his name changed from yellow to green. Lionel did not cheer. He closed his eyes for several seconds, like a man finally setting down something he had carried for too long. Before Lionel left the table, Darius removed the old orange connector from his pocket. He placed it inside Lionel's hand. "One bad connection can stop an entire system," Darius said, "but that doesn't mean the system cannot be repaired." Lionel closed his fingers around the small object. Behind them, another applicant entered. A woman took a number, sat on a metal chair, and held her folder against her chest. Darius saw the fear on her face. He pulled his chair closer to the desk. The recruitment center door opened, not for one person, for the next person. A system does not become fair simply because it does not know how to hate. Sometimes, the most dangerous injustice does not come from someone deliberately choosing to do something cruel. It comes from people performing their assigned tasks, from machines following the instructions they were given, and from powerful people who never return to examine whom the final result has crushed. The story of Celeste Rowan, Darius Bell, and young Nia is fictional. The characters, company, and events were created to reflect real barriers involving employment and background screening. According to the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, an arrest by itself does not establish that a person engaged in criminal conduct. The use of arrest or conviction records in employment decisions may also result in unlawful discrimination when it creates a disproportionate impact based on race or national origin. The United States Federal Trade Commission also explains that when an employer uses a third-party background report to make an adverse employment decision, the applicant has the right to be informed, to receive a copy of the report, and to dispute inaccurate or incomplete information. If an incorrect background report is preventing you from finding employment in the United States, request a copy of the report from both the employer and the company that supplied the information. Free or low-cost civil legal assistance may also be available through the Legal Services Corporation, which supports 129 independent legal aid programs across the states and territories of the United States. Real change should never depend upon waiting for a billionaire to witness someone's suffering. It depends upon laws that protect people, institutions that accept accountability, workers who are allowed to question harmful procedures, and ordinary human beings who refuse to look away. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear its message, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about dignity, courage, and the systems that shape people's lives. Thank you for listening.